I'm delighted that you have a show because you're fresh, you're funny, you're great. And I want you to know something. From my heart, I never liked you.
Don Rickles was more than just a funny person. He was a stage killer whose smooth way of making fun of people made Hollywood both shake and laugh. But behind the laughs, a mean truth was hiding. There were people he really hated and would never forgive. In his last years, Rickles suddenly showed a secret he had kept his whole life, a shocking list of people he hated. It had a man with no talent who got lucky and went into politics, a worshipped star who had nothing real about him, and even a close friend whose job was connected to bad people. The questions are, why did Rickles stay quiet for so many years? And what made him decide to tell everything in his last days? Don Rickles became famous in the 1950s and 1960s when Las Vegas became America's fun center. With his no-limits mean comedy, he quickly became one of the most well-known funny people in the country. For many years, Rickles was a regular guest on big talk shows, especially The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where he would freely attack any star sitting next to him. The nickname Mr. Warmth that people gave him sounds nice, but it was actually a joke on stage. Rickles was anything but warm. He picked apart everything from looks, race, and habits to jobs with sharp, mean jokes. Yet, strangely, it was this smooth meanness that made crowds go crazy, while his targets still laughed and took his attacks. Rickles died in 2017 at the age of 90, leaving a great mark on American comedy. But behind that story, few people knew. This not everyone he used for laughs on stage was just a joke. There were people Rickles truly hated deep down, and every mean joke was a real knife aimed right at them. 1. Clint Eastwood, a shiny but empty star. While most of Don Rickles' targets came from politics or comedy, Clint Eastwood was special. He was one of the few movie stars to become a favorite target of Rickles. To Rickles, Eastwood was just a quiet actor with one way of acting, yet somehow he was called Hollywood's great man. On a Las Vegas stage, Rickles once gave a crushing blow. "Clint, you have two looks. One is a frown, the other is a deeper frown. And that's how you become a Hollywood legend." The crowd roared with laughter, while Eastwood, known for being quiet and serious, only gave a cold smile. But in Rickles' eyes, that reaction only proved his point. Eastwood wasn't a good actor, but simply a face that knew how to frown at the right time. Rickles kept saying that Eastwood's career was a joke. He said, if he'd been born with a big smile like Sinatra, he'd probably be selling tickets at a fair now, instead of sitting in the director's chair. Or, Hollywood turned a tall, quiet guy into a Western hero. Really, Clint's only good at one thing, staring until his enemy runs away from being bored. In Rickles' eyes, this was unfair to truly good actors that Hollywood had forgotten. But Eastwood didn't seem to care. That cold way only made Rickles more angry. Clint, if you get any colder. Though neither openly hated the other every time Rickles showed up, Eastwood knew he'd be the joke in front of the crowd. And every time Eastwood kept his hard, stone-like face, Rickles got more stuff for his mean jokes. If Clint Eastwood was just a hollow star in Rickles' eyes, the next person on this list is a totally different story. 2. Dean Martin, the charming star hiding a drinker's true nature. Dean Martin, the right-hand man of the Rat Pack, was the one Don Rickles loved to make fun of the most. To Rickles, Martin was the perfect example of someone who lived on his good looks and fake humor instead of truly working hard at his job. In the middle of his Las Vegas shows, Rickles didn't think twice about calling Martin Vegas's fancy drunk. The crowd roared. But everyone understood that Don Rickles was directly attacking the great image Dean Martin had carefully built. A gentleman with a whiskey glass in hand who would sing and flirt with women as if life were one endless party. Rickles hated that. To him, Martin was simply a naturally charming, lazy person. His singing voice was sweet, but never made perfect, and his acting was okay, but covered up by a funny, natural personality. Instead of practicing, Martin chose to hold a drink smile and let the crowd fool themselves into thinking they were watching a born talent. Rickles often made fun of him to his face. "Dean, you don't sing, you just yawn with a tune." Or, "You succeeded by drinking more than you sang." If Las Vegas ever runs out of whiskey, your career is over. What made Don Rickles most angry was that Dean Martin was loved by the whole world. At the time, Martin was the heart of the Rat Pack, the powerful group of artists who ruled Las Vegas, while Rickles had to work hard to build his career. All Martin needed was one clever comment to make the entire room go wild. On some nights, Rickles' attacks on Martin were so mean that the crowd was shocked. "Dean, you're so drunk that if the crowd clapped for another minute, you'd think you're in a bar and order another drink." In his last days, Rickles still talked about Dean Martin as one of the names that bothered him to the bone. Martin stood for the type of artist Rickles hated most, fake stuff being worshipped, and laziness being called talent. But Rickles didn't just stop at those who lived by the bottle to him. Another famous person was even more worth blaming. 3. Ronald Reagan, the man with no talent who still got power. In the 1960s, before he was president, Ronald Reagan was just a B-list actor who often showed up in clubs, and it was here that Don Rickles found his favorite target, in Rickles' eyes. Reagan stood for everything he hated. No talent, just a smile and a robot way of saying lines. Every time Reagan showed up, Rickles was filled with new energy. Rickles once angrily said, "Ronnie, you were so bad in the movies that Hollywood had to push you into politics." Reagan was known for staying calm, but those attacks bothered him. Backstage, Reagan once told a close friend that Rickles didn't know when to stop. Their friendship was always tight. Rickles saw Reagan as a master of faking it, while Reagan saw Rickles as a rude clown who was only good at making noise. When Reagan became president in 1981, Rickles kept attacking him on national TV. "Mr. President, I still remember you from those awful films. It's a miracle America chose a character actor to lead the world." For Rickles, Reagan was the perfect example of a B-list actor who changed himself into an A-list political star. Every time Reagan showed up at a comedy show, Rickles didn't think twice about firing away, "Ronnie, even the dog Lassie had more memorable parts than you." Or, "You're the only president in history, I believe, could be replaced by a character actor." The bitter joke was that the more he was made fun of, the more Reagan laughed. He saw it as a joke, while Rickles saw Reagan as the example of a disgrace, a failure on screen who was celebrated by the world when he entered politics. He called Reagan the name that shamed Hollywood, and that was the funniest trick of the 20th century. The worst man on screen became the best actor in politics. 2. Don Rickles, Ronald Reagan, was just the first proof that Hollywood could turn a nobody into a star. And he wasn't the only one. For Frank Sinatra, the lounge king whose kingdom was built on the Underworld. On the outside, Frank Sinatra and Don Rickles were close friends. Sinatra often took Rickles to the most fancy restaurants in Las Vegas, bringing him to meet big spenders and casino owners. Many even said that without Sinatra's support, Rickles would never have made it out of the small comedy clubs to become a famous name in America. But Sinatra was also Rickles' #1 target on stage. In 1960s Las Vegas, when the mafia still had a tight hold on the casinos, no one dared to cross Sinatra, who was both the king of music and rumored to have ties to the underworld. And while the whole city bowed down, only Don Rickles dared to look up and make fun of him. "Frank, without the mafia, you'd just be a second-rate lounge singer." The entire room held its breath. People feared Rickles would be taken backstage and dealt with that very night. But, against what everyone expected, Sinatra laughed and clapped, and Rickles became the only person in show business who could insult Sinatra and still walk away. Deep down, Don Rickles both looked up to and hated Frank Sinatra. In his eyes, Sinatra was clear proof of a power trick. His God-given voice was real. But Sinatra's legendary status was held up by the shadow of the mafia and shady backstage connections. Rickles hated success that was built on power instead of pure talent. So he didn't think twice about tearing off his friend's fancy suit right in front of the crowd. Sinatra, as always, laughed loudly, clapped, and acted forgiving. But behind that smile, no one knew if it was truly the kindness of the lounge king or hidden anger buried in a shiny glass of whiskey. And if Frank Sinatra was a close but mixed friend in the fancy circle of Vegas, Rickles' hate was saved for another person, someone who was called a graceful star, but who in his eyes was a symbol of wildness and drinking. 5. Bob Hope, the man who used laughter to hide his fakeness. To Don Rickles, Bob Hope, a star of American comedy, was the example of everything he hated in the art of comedy. Too sweet, too clean, too fake. Rickles once angrily said, "Bob, Hope is so funny I fall asleep before he even walks on stage." While Hope chose safe jokes to please everyone, Rickles believed comedy had to be sharp, honest, and brave. To Rickles, Hope was just a perfect host, someone who knew how to make the crowd laugh just enough, but who never dared to cross the line. That wasn't art, it was a made product. Rickles often publicly attacked Hope with deadly blows. "Bob, you never upset anyone. But then again, you never make anyone laugh out loud either. Or you're so safe that if you went to heaven, the angels would probably yawn from being bored." What Don Rickles hated most was how smart Bob Hope was at keeping his long career. Rickles hated how Hope had turned comedy into a sweet fake syrup that anyone could easily swallow without thinking. While Rickles took risks, poking at pain and showing the truth, Hope chose to please his crowd, showing a world of humor free of sharp edges. Rickles once meanly said, "Bob Hope is the Disneyland of comedy. It's beautiful and shiny, but it has no truth." But on Don Rickles' hate list, Hope was the ultimate fake, a person who turned laughter into a harmless product, hiding all the pain and truth that art should face. To Rickles, Bob Hope's existence was an insult to real comedy. He saw Hope as proof of a Hollywood that liked dishonesty, safety, and laziness. And that's why in his last days, Rickles still talked about Bob Hope as one of the names that bothered him to his core. A legend in the eyes of the world, but just a dull ghost in his. And it didn't stop there. While Bob Hope was the Disneyland of comedy to polished American TV, had no shortage of other stars that rubbed Rickles the wrong way. 6. Johnny Carson. A TV legend, but was his talent worth the hype? In the 1970s and 1980s, Johnny Carson was the most powerful person on American TV. He was called by crowds the king of late night, the man who could make millions laugh every night with just a raised eyebrow. But in the mean eyes of Don Rickles, Johnny Carson was just a dull host who lived by the script and had no real spark. Even though Carson gave him many chances to shine, that work friendship couldn't stop Rickles from hating Carson. In front of a crowd, Rickles once cruelly made fun of, "Johnny, you're so charming that your wife left you," and the crowd still didn't notice. The entire studio crowd burst out laughing. Rickles kept jabbing at Carson live on air. "Johnny, you're so serious that if you had an accident, you'd turn it into a news report, not a laugh." He added, "You're not a comedian, Johnny. You're just a host," who was lucky enough to have the longest seat in TV history. What Rickles hated most about Carson was his smugness. In Rickles' eyes, Carson always played it safe, saying just enough, and never daring to break the mold to truly surprise the crowd. Carson was a master at controlling the mood, but Rickles saw that as a form of lying, a way of tricking the public into thinking he was the king of comedy, when he was really just the king of the script. Backstage, Johnny Carson was known for being private and hard to approach. Don Rickles once bluntly said, "Johnny, you're so private that even your own shadow doesn't want to talk to you." A bitter friendship existed between them. Carson needed Rickles to create explosive laughs for his show, and Rickles needed Carson as the perfect background to let loose his roasts. But the more he appeared, the more Rickles hated him. He saw Carson as an empty shell, a legend built from studio lights, not from genuine stage presence, and that's why on his final hate list, Rickles didn't forget to include Johnny Carson, a work friend, a TV star, but in his eyes, the dullest host in the history of American comedy. But American TV didn't just have kings, it also had queenspeople, praised for their sharpness and wit, but who in Rickles' eyes were just an annoying thorn. 7. Joan Rivers, the queen of mean and a hard-to-swallow thorn for Don Rickles. In American comedy, Joan Rivers was famous as the queen of mean, sharp, acid-tongued, and unafraid of anyone. But it was that very style that made her a constant target for Don Rickles. If Rickles was the king of direct insults, Rivers was the queen of tearing down, and her existence felt like a direct competition that Rickles couldn't stomach. From their very first time on a Las Vegas stage together, Don Rickles felt that Joan Rivers was not on the same wavelength. He saw her as someone who only used cruelty, To shock the crowd rather than skillfully keeping the line between insulting and laughing. Because of this, Rickles often made Rivers a main target. Joan, if you get any uglier, Vegas will put up a permanent sign banning you. The crowd roared with laughter, but Joan Rivers's face turned red. To Rickles, this wasn't just a harmless joke, it showed genuine hate. He felt Joan only knew how to use her appearance and a knife-sharp tongue to get attention with no artistic depth. Rickles didn't stop there. In many shows, he constantly attacked Joan doesn't need to look in the mirror to put on makeup. She looks in the mirror to insult herself. Or she's had so much plastic surgery that if the power went out, her whole face could crash like a broken computer system. The crowd laughed, but everyone saw this as a hidden fight between two masters of insult comedy, one who had become a legend and one who was making her position solid as the Queen of Mean. For her part, Joan Rivers didn't back down. Backstage, she once fought back. Don Rickles isn't Mr. Warmth, he's Mr. Acid. If you're near him for too long, your soul might melt. This quote quickly spread, turning their tension into a topic of talk. Two comedians who used the same weapon, but hated each other because each believed the other had ruined the art form. To Rickles, Rivers was the symbol of rough copy. He hated that the public called her his female version, while he believed Rivers had turned insult comedy into brutal, graceless jabs that even damaged the genre's image. To the crowd, Joan Rivers was a comedy queen. But in Rickles' eyes, she was just a noisy shadow. Someone who used insults for fame, but never reached the grace of true insult comedy. And while Joan Rivers was the Queen of Mean who Rickles saw as a disgrace to the genre, Hollywood had another clown whom he hated even more. Someone the world worshipped, but whom Rickles saw as an eye-popping absurdity. 8. Jerry Lewis. The noisy clown Rickles hated. In the 1950s and 1960s, Jerry Lewis was seen as a wonder by the whole world. With his naughty face, high-pitched voice, and over-the-top physical comedy, he made crowds roar with laughter in his slapstick films. Hollywood called Lewis a comedy genius, while the French press put him on the same level as Charlie Chaplin. But in Don Rickles' eyes, all that praise was a mistaken worship. To him, Jerry Lewis wasn't a genius, but just a show-off who pleased crowds. Rickles believed comedy had to be honest and brave enough to poke at pain and truth. As for Lewis, he just had to scream, trip, or make a stupid face to make the crowd howl with laughter. Rickles once made fun of him in front of thousands of people. Jerry doesn't do comedy. Jerry just screams and hopes the crowd thinks it's funny. That line was like a knife, stabbing straight into the slapstick style that Lewis had worked hard to build. In Rickles' eyes, Lewis's tricks and twisted faces were nothing more than a cheap fare where laughter was bought with overacting, not intelligence. Rickles added, Jerry Lewis makes kids laugh. Adults, they just get tired. And he's the reason I hate 1950s Hollywood comedies. But what Rickles hated most was the weird love from France. When the Paris media praised Lewis as a genius, Rickles laughed. If France thinks Jerry Lewis is a genius, they probably think snails are pizza. In his last days, when looking back on his career, Don Rickles still talked about Jerry Lewis in an unhappy tone. On his hate list, Lewis was proof of one thing. Not every legend is art. Sometimes it's just absurdity that scarily is worshipped by the public, but what truly puzzles the public is the question. Why did Don Rickles, who never held back from lashing out at Frank Sinatra, Ronald Reagan, or Clint Eastwood, keep his hate list a secret for so many years? And why did he wait until his last years, when he was almost 92, to tell the truth? The answer lies in Rickles' true nature. On stage, he was Mr. Warmth, bitterly insulting, but able to make the entire room laugh. But off stage, Rickles knew the thin line between a joke and a blame. In 1960s Las Vegas, a wrong word aimed at a powerful person could make a comedian disappear overnight. Rickles once walked that tightrope with Sinatra and survived thanks to the mob bosses clapping, but he understood that publicly hating someone in real life wasn't a joke. It was a battle that could destroy a career. Rickles chose silence because his career needed laughter, not enemies. He knew that once the hate list was released, it would no longer be art. It would turn into personal hate, leading to arguments and even real danger. For years, he turned his hate into stage material, making fun of Reagan, ridiculing Dean Martin, and attacking Bob Hope. But it was all a public joke to protect himself. However, as time passed, that silence became a burden. When he was at the end of the road, Rickles had nothing left to lose. Without the stage lights or a crowd waiting to laugh, he faced himself and the bitterness he'd hidden his entire life. The list for Rickles wasn't just who I hate. It was a charge against an entire entertainment industry he saw as fake and full of false worship. He told it because he wanted the truth to be recorded, a truth no longer covered by laughter. These were no longer jokes, but a final confession that behind the clapping and roaring laughter, Don Rickles still held in his heart the names he saw, as symbols of falsehood, laziness, and meaningless worship. And perhaps only in his twilight years did he have the courage to admit that he had lived his whole life with thorns in his heart. Sinatra, a close friend who relied on the mafia; Reagan, a second-rate actor turned president; Dean Martin, a celebrated drunkard; Clint Eastwood, a stone-faced legend; Bob Hope, sweetly fake; Johnny Carson, the dull king of the script; Jerry Lewis, the absurd clown who was made holy. His entire life, Rickles turned hatred into art. He hid it behind jokes, attacking people. On stage, with sarcasm to make the crowd roar, he lived as if he didn't truly hate anyone, as if it was all just humor. But behind the laughter was a bitterness he never spoke of. It was only at the end of his life, when he had nothing to lose, that Rickles let his true feelings return to their proper form. A hate list, bitter raw, with no humorous cover to hide behind. No longer a joke to make people laugh, but a confession that made people shake. It was not just about who Don Rickles hated to his core. It was a charge he delivered against an entertainment industry full of unfairness and falsehood. It was the last sigh of a man who lived his entire life in the spotlight, but who never stopped hating the fake idols built by blind worship. And so, in his final days, Don Rickles was no longer Mr. Warmth. He returned to being a raw, mean Don Rickles, who didn't need to make jokes for laughs, but just needed to speak the truth that all his life he had lived with these thorns, and until the very end they had never disappeared. Perhaps that meanness was the true confession of his entire career. But after the names on the hate list were shown, what remained was not just hate, but a question. What did Don Rickles finally leave the world beyond those bitter jabs? All secrets finally lead to a single-word legacy. His legacy isn't in a collection of random jokes, but in the way he redefined the very nature of American comedy. Before, Rickles' comedy often revolved around safe situations and stories meant to make the crowd comfortable. After Rickles, people realized that laughter could come from raw truth, from daring to touch on the most difficult things. He paved the way for a generation of insult comedy, from comedians in Las Vegas and New York to rebellious faces on American TV. The strange thing is that in real life, Rickles was a gentle person devoted to his family, loving his wife and children so much that he never had a single scandal throughout his decades-long career. Friends said that after his brutal onstage roasts, Rickles was often the first to shake hands, hug, and say thank you. That was the paradox that created his appeal, a warm heart hidden beneath a mean exterior. Rickles also left his mark on film and TV, from his supporting role in Run Silent Run, Deep 1958, and the series CPO Sharky 2, voicing the character of Mr. Potato Head in the Toy Story movies, which brought him to a younger generation. But above all, it was the nights in Las Vegas where he held a microphone and spoke to the world that he truly shined. Don Rickles' legacy isn't just the art of the roast. It's also a life philosophy that sometimes the hard truth needs to be shown with laughter. He proved that, when done gracefully, even the most biting insults can become a form of freedom, allowing the crowd to laugh at the fakeness and absurdity around them. And perhaps that's why he waited until the end of his life to tell his bitter hate list. Not to show hatred, but for the world to understand that after the laughter is the truth. And after the truth is a person who lived fully with his making fun wit. Don Rickles was more than a comedian. He was living proof of an artist who dared to turn bitterness into laughter and to say the things the whole world avoided. For nearly 7 decades, Rickles never bowed to anyone. Not to Sinatra, not to Reagan, not to Hollywood, and not to the sweet standards crowds were used to. He walked on stage with a single rule: the truth must be shown, and laughter is the knife that cuts apart falsehood. But Rickles was also a man of contradictions. He roasted the world, but was gentle with his family. He was a Las Vegas killer on stage, but a loyal friend in real life. He made fun of legends, but he also became one himself. When Don Rickles passed away in 2017, Hollywood didn't just lose a comedian. The world lost a raw, unpolished mirror that showed both the glory and the fakeness of the entertainment industry. He left a legacy not through blockbuster movies or memorable roles, but through a style no one dared to copy, a style of absolute honesty where insults were changed into artistic legacy. Today, in the memory of millions of fans, Don Rickles is more than just the roasts that made people cry with laughter. He has become an unforgettable echo, a reminder that the art of comedy only truly lives on when it dares to go to the very heart of the truth. Not through pleasing and not through safe laughter, but through sharp stabs that touch on pain and turn it into a moment of release. Perhaps by daring to be so true to his core, Rickles became immortal. He didn't just make people laugh, he exposed them. He didn't just mock, he shined a light on them. And for more than half a century on stage, Rickles proved one thing. Laughter can be cruel, but it's that very cruelty that keeps it honest. He passed away in 2017, ending a 90-year journey of glory and bitterness. But his legacy lives on in every quip repeated on talk shows, in every burst of laughter that erupts when people listen to old recordings. Every time that laughter echoes, it's as if Rickles is still there, sitting on stage, squinting and delivering a joke that makes the whole room go silent before it explodes. A legend's life has come to an end, but his laughter will never be silenced. It still echoes in the memories of Hollywood and backstage stories, and in the hearts of those who once heard him roast them and still laughed. Don Rickles is no longer present in flesh and bone, but he lives on through the most important thing an artist can leave behind: an irreplaceable legacy in the history of American comedy. If the secrets behind the spotlight have surprised you, then get ready. Behind the curtains of Hollywood, there are countless untold stories, truths that could shock you even more.